What is love? Baby, don't hurt me. Welcome to Strip Cover Lit, where we squeeze the bigger picture out of literature. I'm Adrian Ford, and we are here for another short story discussion, which will appear in three playlists here on the channel. Number one, the short story discussion playlist. Number two, a short story by short story read along of 10th of December from George Saunders. And number three, the George Saunders playlist. So, this video will have three different sections: a So What Happened recap of the story, a literary criticism portion of the video where we talk about the goings on of the short story, and finally, a writer's corner where we talk about some things that we can, or maybe more importantly from the short story, cannot take from George Saunders. So, what happened? Experimental drugs. It's always a good start. We're in a testing center with our narrator, Jeff, who we later find out is a murderer. He's been given a drug to help him articulate better and a drug to help him admire nature more. Then they join a girl, and both are given a drug to make them extremely attracted to one another. Then Jeff and Heather make love many times. They are brought back to quote unquote baseline and then explain what happened, and then they part ways. After lunch, Rachel is brought in. So Heather and Rachel. The same deal. Boom, boom, boom. But this time, Jeff hesitates to be taken back to baseline. Next, Jeff is in the control room. He breaks into the control room. And Heather and Rachel, they are together. Jeff gets the chance to give, or no, this isn't where he breaks in. My fault. Jeff gets the choice to give one of them Darkenflox, a drug that makes very, very bad stuff go on in the mind of one of them. Jeff can't choose, proving that he is not attached to either of them. So he doesn't get the girls. So he doesn't give them Darkenflox, and the girls are allowed to leave. Then Jeff is put in a room with a guy he doesn't know for a few minutes before being allowed to leave. Instead, he goes into the control room where Heather was being asked to give Darkenflox to one of those two, him or the other guy, Rogan. Then he's sat with Rogan and no one gets Darkenflox, but Jeff is miffed at being jerked around. The next day, Jeff is drugged and convinced to Darkenflox Heather because they think maybe he has lingering feelings of desire for one of them. Heather being hinted to about her crimes, or Jeff is being hinted to about Heather's crimes, and promised more video time with his mom. Heather gets the Darkenflox this time. He gives it to her, and she breaks down so bad she almost dies. Then they do the same with Rachel, or they try. But Jeff will not consent to his articulation drug to explain why he will or will not give the drug to Rachel. So they have to get a waiver. The waiver will allow them to give Jeff a drug that will basically force him to give consent to anything they ask. Then they can give him his articulation drug. Then he gets to say why he did or did not Darkenflox Rachel. To get that waiver, they have to leave the room. They accidentally forget their drug remote. So Jeff Darkenfloxes himself. Or on the Darkenflox, suffering from the Darkenflox, rather, he uses the corner of the table to end himself. And then we get this passage from Saunders. So this is why you read Saunders. From somewhere, something kind asked. So this is after he has finished himself on the table. From somewhere, something kind asked, "Would you like to go back? It's completely up to you. Your body appears salvageable." No, I thought, no thanks. I've had enough. My only regret was Mom. I hoped someday, in some better place, I'd get the chance to explain to her. Maybe she'd be proud of me one last time after all these years. From across the woods, as if by common accord, birds leapt from their trees and darted upwards. I joined them, flew among them. They did not recognize me as something apart from them, and I was happy, so happy, because, for the first time in years, and forevermore. I had not killed and never would. So, what what are the literary implications of this story? The number one question I think that we have to come away from this story asking ourselves is love real? What is love? So we have a book from 1994, The Evolution of Desire by David Buss. And we have a short summary of this here, courtesy of Wikipedia. The Evolution of Desire, Strategies of Human Mating is a 1994 book by evolutionary psychology professor David Buss. It is the first book to present a unified theory of human mating behavior, based not on romantic notions but on current scientific evidence. In the largest study of human mating at the time, 10,047 people were surveyed in 37 cultures across 6 continents and 5 islands. Buss expands on the Donald Simmons' The Evolution of Human Sexuality, 1979, by examining all the actions that occur before and after sexual activity, strategies of mate competition, mate attraction, mate selection, mate retention, mate poaching, sexual conflict, mate ejection, and remating over a lifespan. The book took 4 years to write and is based on a decade of research by Buss. A key premise of his work is that humans have multiple mating strategies, some of which reveal important sex differences. Buss attributes this to instinctual adaptations, which he argues are universal across cultures and rooted in ancestral selection pressures. Similarities between men and women involve their use of deception, sexual display, and denigration of intrasexual rivals. 2 chapters were added in 2003 edition, revised edition. The 3rd edition was released in 2016, containing new materials integrated throughout the book. Now, this is if you want to read further, but surely you have some opinion on the matter yourself. Personally, I don't know if I necessarily believe in romantic love. There are also many studies going into dependent love. How does a child love their parents, and how do parents love their children? These are different types of love. I think that there is a large deal of romantic love that can be attributed to something like comfort plus complacency. Now, I know that sounds super romantic, but essentially what it comes down to, in my opinion, is the ability to feel like you can be yourself around someone else. That's what I think a lot of romantic love is. If you can mix in some bit of gratitude, then yeah, there's going to be a whole lot of possibly dependency, we get to that word again, in that relationship. If you can mix in some sense of responsibility, then I think you have a potent brew for what might be considered love largely. Comfort, complacency, responsibility, those, and gratitude. Those 4 things mixed into one relationship probably feels a whole lot like what we would describe as love. That's my opinion. That is maybe not the most literary criticism, maybe not the most politically correct way to go into it, but that's how I feel about what love, as we consider it between peers, romantic love, would be considered. Now, the second thing that I think is worth talking about with this story is an ethics question known as the trolley problem. So we have here feelings of romance, feelings of desire, and they are mixed with all of these other things. And then Jeff, Rachel, Heather, and Rogan are asked to darken flocks someone. Now, what would have been interesting from this would have been if Jeff were in the control center being asked to darken flocks Heather or Rogan, right? Would there have been different inclinations in that process? We are led to believe that because Jeff is a compassionate person, he would not have darkened flocks to Rogan, despite the fact that he did seem to feel some bit of jealousy there. But that was not introduced into the story. What is the trolley problem? The trolley problem is a well known ethical dilemma which explores moral decision making and utilitarian versus deontological ethics. It was originally presented by British philosopher Philippa Foot in 1967 and later expanded on by Judith Jarvis Thomson. Here is a basic of the trolley problem. This is from ChatGPT. The classic trolley problem scenario, pardon me, a trolley is speeding down a track towards five people who are tied up and unable to move. You are standing at a lever and you can divert the trolley onto a different track. However, there is one person tied up on that side of the track. Question: should you pull the lever and switch the trolley's path, sacrificing one person to save five others, or refrain from acting, resulting in the deaths of five people? There are variations of this problem. The fat man variation: instead of a lever, you are on a footbridge above the tracks. A large man is standing next to you. If you push him off the bridge, his body is sufficient to stop the trolley, saving the five people but on the track, but killing the man you pushed. The surgeon variation: a surgeon has five patients who need organ transplants to survive, and one healthy person in the waiting room. The surgeon can kill the healthy person and save the five patients. Is he morally permissible to sacrifice one to save five? The bystander variation: you are a bystander who can pull a lever to divert a trolley, but don't have direct control over the outcome. Does this change moral responsibility? So, this is a long standing question in the ethical community. If there is such a community, would it be ethical to be in part of that community? But it is a classic sort of problem. So, in some ways, many George Saunders short stories are kind of like Michael Crichton in this way. What Michael Crichton does is he takes two scientific things. He takes chaos theory and cloning, and he can mash them together and come out with Jurassic Park. Here we have the question of what is love? Is love real? And the trolley problem, all sort of mixed up in this wild short story that is one of the most successful short stories of this generation. There's a movie about it, how much does that count for, etc. But it is a very successful short story in that regard. The trolley problem with this story is answered by Jeff going ahead and jumping in front of the trolley. Now, the further implications of this short story that we don't see here are this. Probably this exact study happens again. Four more people threatened with Darkenflox. Somebody has to get it. And will those people go through the same thing? We understand that because Absinthe seems to be very scientifically minded, seems to be very after the results of this study. And we have every reason to believe he's just going to go ahead and pull these triggers again. Moving on to the writer's corner portion of this video. What can we take from this short story as writers ourselves? The first thing is this: do not emulate George Saunders. Probably, if you are watching this video, you are not a multi-award winning author, and you will not get a 37-page short story published. That is very difficult. You are going to find difficulty finding a publisher, finding a publication that will take a 37-page short story. There's George Saunders. I believe Sea Oak was his first breakout short story. I might be completely wrong on that, but Sea Oak is a pretty compact short story. It was widely anthologized in its day, from what I understand, and much more likely to get published from a writer that no one knows, much more likely to get published from an author that is not someone who regularly publishes novels and has a name, etc. But yeah, you're going to find problems if you're writing 37-page short stories and you do not have a platform of your own. The next thing to take from this is the question of perspective. Would this short story have been more immediate from a third-person perspective? The reason I say that is a little bit ironic with the ending of this short story. If we're talking about it as first person versus third person, normally when you're getting a first person past tense narrative, it means that your narrator survived. So it takes a lot of the risk out of the short story. Now, ironically, what Saunders has done is by setting this in first person, he has undercut that, and the narrator does die by the end of this short story. But we don't have the tools necessary to see that beforehand. If this short story were third person, the risk becomes more immediate for Jeff, but depending on how close the psychic distance is between the narrative, the third person narrator, and Jeff, how close are we to Jeff, how many of Jeff's internal thoughts are we able to have relayed to us, we get an entirely different experience. We would also, so if this were third person, it might be a novel because it opens us up to Rogan and Absentee and Heather and Rachel. We would get perhaps viewpoints from all of these characters. So then we have to, how willing is your audience to accept narration from an individual that is deceased? Now, George Saunders' tone is and voice are two things, I guess I should say, that really sort of let us accept narration from a person who's dead. If this is third person, we lose that. Remember, I said that final passage there in the short story, that's the meat of Saunders. That's why you read George Saunders, is that he has a very he's able to translate complex emotions, feelings, thoughts, desires through normally inarticulate speakers, characters. You can't always get away with that. You're willing to accept it. You kind of throw your palms to the sky and accept it with George Saunders because of that tone, because of his voice. If you are a more serious type of writer, this ending becomes very problematic. Your audience may not be as receptive to receiving narration from a character that is deceased, especially in the past tense, or in the present tense, really, for that matter. But our speaker is speaking from the place of being deceased, relaying this story. So it's sort of a give and take with this short story as far as the narrative is concerned. I will caution that you have to get it right if you're going to do this. Tone and voice have to work in concert to get this right. So those are the thoughts that I have for Escape from Spiderhead from George Saunders. If you like or appreciate this sort of thing, hitting the like button really does help me out, as it tells YouTube to share this video with other literature lovers. If you find yourself here by chance but not design, literature is the only thing I talk about on this channel, dropping multiple videos every single week. There's poetry every Monday, and I hope to have you back for the next one.